I will.
Okay, so let's generate positive motivation first. So let's spend a few moments collecting our attention. Letting go of paying attention or giving our energy to all the other things going on in our lives for now. Just trying to focus on our own mind, generate some mental focus. So focus on an object of meditation, your breath or your nature of your mind or something else for a few moments. And then within that, generate a positive motivation, thinking about why you're here and what do you want to accomplish through this session. And then if you can also try to connect it to your highest aims, whether that's enlightenment or liberation or something else, just to be more altruistic, be a better person, whatever that might be, and try to connect your reasons for being participating in this session, being here now, to your highest aims and all other sentient beings, and you wish to benefit them as well. So generate a motivation. And then finally, generate the mind of, well, if you like, generate the mind of refuge in either the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, or any object of reverence that you turn to for refuge. So you visualize or imagine that your object of refuge being present, actually, in the space around you. You can visualize in the space in front of you. And then think of the things you go for refuge from, whether it be fear of suffering in the lower realms, or fear of samsara, or fear of just hurting other people, or whatever. And then remember how your object of faith has the power to protect you from those possible degenerate states, and generate the mind of refuge. Okay, so now we can begin. Who's Tongyu? I see a Tongyu on the bottom right hand of my screen. Is that another new person? Or is that just an old person with a different...
Hi, yeah, it's my first time here. I got invited by Melody and Jorge.
Okay, great, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And how's Art doing before we continue? Mariellen, do we have an update on Art?
Yes, I saw his square in a Zoom room briefly this weekend, but I didn't see his face. He wrote to me and he said he is he's feeling better and he will join us again when he can.
Okay, great. Okay, so today's session, maybe first just to think of where we're at in this module, death and impermanence, or impermanence and death. Forget the order. So yeah, so this is the fourth module in I think there's 14 modules in Discovering Buddhism. This is the fourth module in the sequence we're doing it in. So we've covered, I think, the mind, how to meditate, and then the Lamrim, the graduated path to enlightenment. It's the third module. So then this is here, the impermanence and death is within the Lamrim. It falls within the small scope, right, of the three scopes: small scope, middle scope, and the great scope. It falls within the small scope. The main topics of the small scope are, well, first there's two preliminary topics depending on a spiritual teacher and the precious human rebirth. And then the actual topics of the small scope are impermanence and death, suffering of the lower realms, refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, and karma, the law of cause and effect. So yeah, so again, the small scope is generally topics presented to persuade us to turn away from attachment to pleasures of this life and to think about what's going to come for us in the future. So the initial way to do that is to remind us that we're all going to die, that all the things we enjoy of this life, from our body, our possessions, our acquaintances, and so forth, all are transitory. They're not going to last forever. We're not going to be in this situation forever. And so when we die, we'll have to we'll leave this body, leave all the associations we have, all the possessions we have, all the reputation and so forth, all will be left behind. So there's some essential aspect of us, our mind, basically, and the habits of mind that we've created, which takes the form of imprints and karma. Those will all continue with us. So yeah, so by thinking about impermanence and death, we're encouraged to focus more on how we use our mind and our attention, which is one reason we try to generate a positive motivation at the beginning of each Dharma session, at least, ideally at the beginning of each day, and then at the outset of every activity we engage in. It's good to think about our motivation as a way of shaping our mind in a positive way again and again, as a way of preparing for death, and ensuring that we go to a happy future rebirth. So within the presentation of impermanence and death, we're doing in 6 sessions. This is the 4th session. So the previous sessions, first was just generally about what is rebirth, who takes rebirth, who dies, what is a person. So general description about what death is in the Buddhist presentation. And the second session was about the benefits of reflecting on impermanence and death, and the drawbacks of not reflecting on it. So why should we do that, in short? Yeah, I want to actually make this session more like an extended meditation, because this topic, what we're discussing today, is the main thing is the 8 stages of absorption at the time of death, which is not really it's not a topic for intellectual like questioning. And I mean, of course, you have to question it, but it's more like an extended meditation, right? So it's a description of what happens at the time of death, and we imagine, going through that experience. So it's not like, like the last week's topic, which is about, is it certain we're going to die or not? When are we going to die? Da, da, da. Of course, all these things are topics for meditation, but the one today is especially just, there's not a lot of questions and discussion. So much needs to be done about it, but it's more important to just practice going, imagining it happening, right? So that's what we'll try to do today. But to build up to that, I want to meditate. So instead of me describing in words what we already did, why don't we just spend a few moments or minutes maybe reflecting on what we've already done so far, right? So the first topic was, what is death? So since you've already listened to the present me speak about, we've discussed about, you've read about, let's just spend a moment reflecting on what is death, as a review. Okay, so now just think about, what does it mean to die? What is a person who dies? how we die because we take rebirth, and then actually what happens at death to the best of your understanding. Just try to remember for a minute or so. Okay, and then the next session we did on the benefits of, or the drawbacks first, the drawbacks of not remembering death and the benefits of remembering death. So spend a minute or so and try to reflect on those in your mind. What are some of the drawbacks of not remembering death? And you don't have to remember the list of 8, of each that I gave before, but you can think about it in your own way. What appears to your mind is the biggest drawbacks of not remembering, not reflecting on death, and the biggest advantages of remembering and thinking about death. And then the last session, we went through the 9-point death meditation. So we can just think about the 3 main points were that it's certain we're going to die, the when we're going to die, the time of death is totally uncertain. And at the time of death, only the Dharma helps, nothing else helps. And then there were 3 subheadings for each of those 3 main headings. So just as well as you can, try to remember and reflect. Don't have to remember each point, but reflect on at least those 3 main headings in your own way. And we can put them in the form of questions as well. Is it certain that I'm going to die? Is it true that it's not certain when I'm going to die? And is it true that only the Dharma helps at the time of death? So take a minute or 2 and reflect on those headings, those questions. Okay, so that's the review. Maybe I was thinking, I was just reflecting on this last. Is it true that only the Dharma helps at the time of death? I think maybe I didn't say it so clearly last time, but one way of thinking about what is Dharma is that whatever goes against the afflictive emotions. So then if you think, well, what are the afflictive emotions? Afflictive, what we say, I mean, it's a difficult translation of the Tibetan is nyomong. Mong means to kind of obscure. Nyun means like nyokta, it's kind of to stir up. So they're kind of emotions that stir up our mind. They disturb the peace of our mind. They kind of stir up in the way like, a gust of wind disturbs the surface. Imagine there's like a lake and it's totally still with a glassy surface. And then a gust of wind comes along and agitates it, makes it full of ripples. So the reflections are no longer clear in the surface anymore. So disturbing emotions are like a gust of wind. The mind, it's not, if it's free from disturbing emotions, it naturally is peaceful, right? It naturally calms down to a totally peaceful, lucid, blissful kind of state. But because we have disturbing emotions arise again and again, that continually disturb the peace of the mind, and also obscure our mind, just like when a gust of wind comes and disturbs the glassy surface of a still lake, it no longer reflects things clearly anymore. So it's a very good analogy, actually, an illustration analogy for how. So the disturbing emotions, they by nature disturb the peace of our mind, and thereby obscure our ability to clearly know things, to be aware of things. So whatever goes against that means it's something that is dharma thereby. So it means whatever is something that brings more peace to the mind, that brings more clarity and illumination and awareness is dharma, right? So of course, anything that brings, when we think about dying, the process of dying, we want peace in our mind. We don't want to be disturbed, right? So of course, anything that brings more peace, more clarity, more joy to the mind is going to help at the time of death. There's no question, right? So if you think about it in that way, it's not like we're thinking about, oh, this dogma, it means I have to remember the image of the Buddha and what the Dalai Lama said and all that. That feels like very heavy, like, oh, at the time of death, I have to remember this Buddhist canon, It's not like that, It means what's dharma in the terms of what brings peace to the mind, Of course, that helps at death. So we think about that way, it's very clear. This doesn't seem like this dogmatic kind of thing. Yeah. We better get on to the topic. So today, the 8 absorptions at the time of death. So again, I made a bunch of PowerPoint slides, and so there's a couple of things we'll reflect on first, and then I'll give you a bunch of information, and then we'll meditate on each of the 8 stages of absorption. So I'm going to jump to PowerPoint slides now. There, okay. So, all right. So here we are, session 4, how we die. So what's the process of dying? The 8 stages of dissolution at the time of death. You all can see the whole screen there, right? You don't see that little panel with the windows in the side? Great, okay. So there's basically 5 kind of headings I've made for today's presentation. First is general advice for the death process. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The main sources for this are Advice for Dying and Living a Better Life by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that book. And then in the PDF packet of required readings for this module, there's one which actually I think I didn't mark out for today's session. I just kind of didn't see. There's a very long essay in there, I guess essay or transcription of a teaching by Lama Zopa Rinpoche called Impermanence is the title. Impermanence by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Maybe I'll just show you real quick because I have it open on my desktop. There's this one. So here he has a very detailed presentation of the 8 absorptions, the time of death. It's starts on page 99. that PDF. Maybe I'll maybe mark that in the outlines, and then send it out again. All right. I don't know how to change from one window to the other while I'm in share mode. It's okay. Okay, so here we are. Anyway, so that's the source, is those two things. Advice for living, living a better life, and impermanence. That, yeah, so the 5 headings we'll go through are general advice for death process, because His Holiness mentions, gives a lot of good general advice. Then the 25 constituents are the 25 sort of things that we're composed of that all disintegrate or absorb or dissolve kind of as we die. They cease to function. So that's kind of the more informational section. And then the 8 stages, just in brief, I'll list them, and then divide them up into 2 groups of the first 4 stages, which are primarily defined by the 4 physical elements of our body ceasing to function, dissolving. And then the last 4 stages, which are primarily described in terms of levels, gross and more gross and subtle levels of our consciousness ceasing to function, and thereby more and more subtle levels of consciousness becoming manifest, having access to those. So those are the 5 sort of headings. So first some general advice, and then we'll reflect on this a little bit. So 4 main things we should think about. First, so how to prepare for death, right? So this is all this 8 stages of absorption of the time of death. Thinking about this is like the way to sort of tangibly prepare for death, right? So we recognize we're definitely going to die. We don't know when we're going to die. It could be any day, so we better prepare now. At the time we die, Dharma is going to help. So, okay, so what do we actually do? How do we actually prepare for that moment when we're dying? So first is prepare by becoming familiar with what happens as we die. So that's what we're talking about today. What happens as we die? What happens in our body? What happens in our mind? What kinds of things appear to the mind? And how can we use each of those experiences to practice, right? To grow and to make it the best it can be. Then the second thing is, okay, so we have to clearly identify the main virtuous mental states that we want to have, that we want to focus on at death, right? So this is like the main thing to do. I have to think about, okay, we're going to die. As I'm dying, how do I want my mind to be? Like what do I want to focus my attention on? What kind of mental state do I want to have? What kind of attitude do I want to have? What kind of thoughts do I want to have? What kind of emotions do I want to have? So we need to, and we can't, it's not the time to eat like from a buffet at the time we're dying. You can't just eat like a whole bunch of things. We need to focus on one thing and just really immerse our mind in that, right? So yeah, so it's good to kind of be clear about, with all the different possible things we can meditate on, what is the one that's most meaningful to us, that we feel most akin to, most is going to be most helpful for us. We feel most confident also in, whatever we're focusing our mind on, we want to be confident we can focus there and have natural desire to do that. Like for most Tibetans, it's the Dalai Lama. They want to focus on His Holiness the Dalai Lama and their faith in him and their total faith in the Dalai Lama. Because that's something, from when they're very young through their whole life, they just naturally, and as a society, as individuals, they just naturally have that very strongly and focus on that and develop that again and again. But so each of us has to look at our own disposition, our own inclinations, and decide what we feel we really want to focus on at the time of death. So that's what we'll come back and reflect on in just a minute. And then once we identify that, we need to practice generating those states repeatedly, again and again, and imagine generating those kind of mental states as we die, right? So we need to practice, right? So for example, if I'm just going to use for us, because just as a practice, generally what His Holiness will say is the best to focus on is wisdom, realizing emptiness, and great compassion of bodhicitta, right? That's what every talk His Holiness gives these days. That's the main 2 points he makes, is to meditate on wisdom, realizing emptiness, and great compassion and bodhicitta. So, but we haven't talked about emptiness here. So, most of us probably don't have a really clear idea what that is. So we'll just use impermanence, because we have talked about impermanence and it's pretty straightforward. And then compassion, yeah, it can be a little complicated. So I think we'll just use love. We can focus on love. So that's the examples I'll just use, but you can plug in, whatever you want. Okay, so say we clearly identify like our understanding of impermanence, and especially love, maybe just, metta, wishing that all sentient beings be happy as what we want to focus on, the death. So then we need to practice generating that again and again, means every day as part of our daily meditation practice. And also imagine the process of dying and imagine focusing on that, generating that attitude of love or whatever you choose as you're dying. Right? Because that's a lot more difficult than just sitting, comfortably in your room with a nice blanket around you and a cup of hot tea and, when everyone else is quiet. I mean, dying is completely different. For most of us, we're probably going to be sick, physically uncomfortable, really weak, having a hard time controlling our mind, like whatsoever. So and then all kinds of weird stuff that's never happened to us happening before, like we can't breathe, for example. I mean, can you imagine how terrifying that is? If you've ever been, I don't know, in a rip current in the ocean or something, or underwater for whatever reason, you can't breathe for a little while. You remember, it gets terrifying very quickly, right? So there are a lot of things happening. It's going to be difficult, right? So we need to practice. Then make strong prayers and dedications. So yeah, it's important, before we die, to make strong prayers and dedicate merit that we have, that we can use that process, dying in a positive way, right? That helps. And that will take a good rebirth. Okay, so now before we go on, let's just, the second one is the most important. Clearly identify the main virtuous mental states you want to have. See, this is the problem. I can't see. If I see you all, I want to see you all while I'm talking, but then I can't see the whole words there. So the mental states that you want to focus on at death. All right, so let's just spend a couple minutes and think about that. All right, so each of us just be quiet for a couple minutes and think about what are the, what do we think the main kind of positive attitude, a virtuous kind of mental state we want to generate at the time of death. Just think about that for yourself. Okay. So this is that's probably the most important thing we'll do this whole session, is think about that. Yeah, because each of us are going to die eventually. And I mean, death is, I mean, it's one of the nicest things I think about the Buddhist presentation of death, is it's, in Buddhism, is that it's presented like as an incredible opportunity actually to develop as a person. Because essentially what happens at the time of death is, well, the mind's separated from the body. So what that means is, because when our mind is kind of mixed with, it's dependent upon, it's very kind of, it's kind of functions in conjunction with our body, you could say. It generates very gross states of mind, right? Our sense consciousness, what we see, hear, smell, they're very, in terms of subtlety, they're quite gross states of mind. Whereas our mental consciousness is much more subtle. So what happens at the time of death is our mind is sort of extricated from the body, separated from the body. So as that happens, much more subtle states of mind become manifest naturally. And so we have access to those. So as those more and more subtle states of mind, culminating in the clear light of death, it's called, as they become manifest, if we can identify those states of mind and then use those to focus on what we feel is most meaningful, on extremely positive states like wisdom, realizing emptiness or impermanence, or love, universal compassion, we can have an experience of those mental states that's more powerful than anything we've had before, right? So we can grow, we can make incredible quick progress on the path at the time of death. So it's an incredible opportunity to really deepen our spiritual practice. Right? So that's the whole point of this presentation of the 8 absorptions at the time of death, is first to identify, what are the most meaningful positive mental states to us, and then how do I recognize and understand these 8 levels of absorption, and then within that actually practice. Okay, is this happening? Is this happening? Then I'm going to use the example I said of like wisdom, realizing impermanence, and love, right? So as this first absorption is happening, okay, I realize that's happening. I want to focus on impermanence and love and develop that more deeply. And then the second one, smoke-like appearance. As the second deeper level is happening, okay, some more subtle level of mind. I want to use that again, focus more deeply on wisdom of impermanence and love. And then more and more and more until this the final, the most, clear light of death, this most incredibly pure, subtle level of mind, I gain access to, manifest, then use that to focus on, impermanence and love. So that's kind of the whole point. But the main thing is at first to just identify what we want to focus on, and then we need to understand the 8 levels of absorption, stages of absorption, and then practice actually training our mind as we experience each of those. Okay, so now we turn to the actual 8 levels. Oops. Okay, anyway, so before we do that, let's jump back. So there's general advice. So then the 25 constituents is just kind of a list, and we'll just go through it like a list without talking about it much, of all the different things that absorb at death, like kind of the different parts of going that are absorbing. So this is quite a detailed presentation. His Holiness doesn't go through each of these 25 in his presentation, but Lama Zopa Rinpoche does in his. And it's, I mean, if you like meditating on this topic and you want to do it like well, you need to know this list, right? So I've just put it here, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But yeah, so we'll just go through those 25 constituents, and then we'll look at the eight stages. Okay. Okay. So the 25 constituents. So there's 5 groups, not of 5 each. So there's 5 groups: the 5 aggregates, the 4 elements, the 6 sense powers, the 5 objects, and the 5 exalted wisdoms. At the time of base means at the stage we are now, because these 5 exalted wisdoms, the Buddhas have perfected them, but we have a sort of reflection of them now. So, okay, so we'll go through each of those. So the 5 aggregates you've heard me talk about before is what the constituents of us as a person. There's our form, is our body. And then the rest are, they have to do with our mind primarily. Feelings, pleasure, pain, and neutrality. Discrimination, thinking, oh, this is a phone, this is a computer, this is my friend, this is my enemy, this I like, this I don't like. Discrimination. And then compositional factors is a catch-all miscellaneous category for like karma and intention and all the other mental factors and, that are part of our mind but don't fit in feeling or discrimination. So there's compositional factors, and then consciousness is mainly our main minds, but primarily within, we have 6 main minds: our eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, and body sense consciousness. So there's a 5 sense consciousness, and then the mental consciousness. So this is primarily the mental consciousness I'm talking about. Anyway, there's 5 aggregates, and you don't feel like you have to. I mean, it's good if you write them down for practice now, but if you can't catch them all, I'm setting out outlines where this is all there already. So, yeah. Okay, so 5 aggregates. Then the 4 elements, easy: earth, water, fire, and air, or wind. Yeah. Earth. So think about what we think about this in this context of the 8 absorptions at the time of death. We're not thinking about the external earth, water, fire, and wind, but that which is part of constituent of our body. So think about the earth element in our body is the factor of solidity and support, and like so our bones, our teeth, our hair, our nails, the sort of supportive structure of the cells and so forth, and the ability to hold ourselves up kind of has to do with earth. And then water is the liquidity in our body, all the liquids that keep our body kind of saturated and lubricated. And then fire is the warmth in our body, and especially the warmth of digestion. Think about this incredible energy that we, it's like a nuclear reactor. We eat all this food, and it's broken down and digested and transformed into, I don't know all the names of the things, but like energy that our cells can use, and we can burn and keep our bodies warm and have energy to do things. So the element of fire, and then the element of air or wind. So wind, I put wind, usually we say air, but it can also kind of translate the same word as wind, lung, Tibetan. But it's the factor of movement. Just kind of think about the prana or chi. There's like spaciousness and lightness. That which is light and moving is the definition of air. So in the body, think about the energy, how the energy moves, and we have movement. We can move our hands. We can move our minds, right? Actually, there's a subtle wind or air and movement of our minds go together, which is why when we focus our mind on a part of our body, we can generate sensation in that part of the body. Energy goes there. Okay, so there's the 4 elements. Great, so there's the 5 aggregates, the 4 elements, and now the 6 sense powers. So 6 sense powers are like the subtle kind of physical thing in our eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. And there's also a mind sense power that enable us to experience the external world and experience objects. So there's an eye organ. In Rinpoche's article, he puts eye organ. I mean, someone uses that term. It's a very early translation, I think, but it doesn't. I think it's the sense power is the more accurate term. So as we die, first, like our eye sense power, it ceases to function. So we can't. Our vision becomes unclear. We can't clearly see things anymore. Then there's the ear sense power, which enables us to hear things. The nose sense power enables us to smell. Tongue sense power enables us to taste. The body sense power enables us to experience like rough and smooth, hot and cold, these kind of tactile sensations, right? And then the mental sense power is that aspect of mind which acts as a cause for a subsequent moment of mind, of the mental consciousness. So each moment of mental consciousness actually is a cause for the subsequent moment of mental consciousness, and in that way it's called a sense power. But don't worry about that too much. Then the next group of 5 are visible, so objects, the 5 objects. So again, okay, so the first visible forms, sounds, scents on the nose, flavors that we taste with the tongue, and then tactile objects we experience with the body. So here again, in this context, we're not primarily speaking about external objects that are external to our body, but those subtle objects that are part of our body. But actually, we're talking about both. But yeah, maybe I should leave it at that. We're talking about both external objects. So as the eye sense power, imagine in the first one, as the eye sense power absorbs or dissolves, ceases to function, we can no longer see external visible forms. Here, the internal doesn't make so much sense because the eyes are focused outward. But the sounds, anyway, we'll come back to it. But just note for now, there's an external objects and the internal 5 objects that are part of our body. We'll come back to it. Okay. Then the 5 objects, and then the last is the 5 exalted wisdoms at the time of the base. So at the time of the base, this means as an ordinary person that we are now, right? Which is a basis for achieving enlightenment, right? When we achieve enlightenment, we'll have the 5 exalted wisdoms of, an enlightened being. But now, as an unenlightened being, we have the 5 exalted wisdoms at the time of the base, which means they're kind of a pale reflection of what will generate later. But, they exist now. So there's mirror-like wisdom, wisdom of equanimity, wisdom of discriminating awareness, all accomplishing wisdom, and the nature of phenomena wisdom, or the wisdom of the nature of phenomena. Yeah. Actually, I wasn't going to include these because they're involve a lot of description to actually understand what they are, so we don't have time for. But Rinpoche includes them in his list, and they are part of the 25 constituents. So I'll see if we have time. I'll try to explain more what each of them are, but don't worry about it too much for now. So just to review, the 25 constituents are the 5 aggregates, which then the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, air, 6 sense powers: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mental sense power. The 5 objects: form, sounds, visible forms, sounds, sense, tastes, tactile objects. Those 5. And then the 5 exalted wisdoms. Okay, so that's the stuff that's going to absorb through the 8 stages. This is my most bold attempt at a PowerPoint slide so far in my life. So this is the 8 stages in brief with color fireworks. Okay, so here they are. So this is just a very brief labeling of each to help you just keep in mind. So when you're actually meditating on the 8 stages, usually we don't have time to spend a lot, so we need a very brief label for each of them just to bring it to mind. And this is the way they're listed in His Holiness book. So there's the Mirage. These first, well, they're all labeled actually according to what appears internally to the mind, right? So there's a mirage, and smoke, and fireflies, and the flame of a lamp. And then, so those are the 4 where the first 4, where the 4 elements mainly are absorbing. And then the last 4 where the consciousness is mainly absorbing the more and more subtle levels. Vivid white, mind sky. So this is Jeffrey Hopkins' translation, this mind sky, but I kind of like it. It's what's in His Holiness book. Vivid white, mind sky. Vivid orange, vivid red, orange, mind sky. Vivid black, mind sky, and clear light. All right, so there's slightly different labels for those 8, but I think these are in His Holiness book and easy to remember. So these are the 8 we're going to go through now. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking there might be questions so far, but yeah, write them down, save them for the end. There are. Okay, so the first 4 stages here are, so here you see I've given them slightly different, just elaborated the label a little bit. Mirage-like appearance. So when we say mirage, we mean there's a mirage-like appearance internally in the mind of the dying person. There's a mirage-like appearance, and there's a smoke, and then there's a smoke-like appearance. And the fireflies, kind of sparks, and the flame of a flickering lamp. So just briefly now, just imagine, right? you're dying, hopefully not, right? So these 8 absorptions, they happen for everyone who dies, human, animal, whoever. But if we die like suddenly, like we fall off a building or something, or in a car crash, then they just flash before our mind very quickly, right? So we wouldn't have time to really identify them unless we're, quite something special. So, but if we die slowly, like old age, some sickness that would die slowly, then they manifest, they appear more slowly, they're easy to identify. So here, when we're beginning meditating on these, we want to imagine dying slowly, right? So imagine a setting, whether you're at home, in a hospital, you're sick, maybe you have pneumonia or something. You're growing weaker and weaker and weaker, and you realize, okay, you're going to die. So then just imagine very briefly here. First, there's a mirage-like appearance to the mind. So here we mean mirage, we mean like a shimmering, like you're looking out on a desert on a hot day, and there's that kind of shimmering, kind of very kind of bright, shimmering, mirror-like reflective appearance just above the hot sand or hot road. Said to be that kind of shimmering, clear appearance, mirage-like appearance. Imagine. And then a smoke-like appearance. So imagine that space sort of fills with smoke. You're like in a room, in a space pervaded with smoke. There's that kind of appearance. You're not coughing, or it's not impairing your breathing. It's just a visual appearance to your mind. And then within that smoke, imagine like sparks or fireflies arise. So here, sparks is like, imagine, at night you're burning a big pile of leaves and kind of or dry grass, and sort of how sparks fly up into the air. Bits of them. Or in like where I grew up in Virginia, in the spring, in the evening, there's lots and lots of fireflies. Imagine, a dark, this kind of smoke, and then it becomes darker, and then you see sort of this flashing, disparate, little lights of fireflies, something like that. Imagine. And then finally, the light of a flickering, like a candle or an oil lamp. So so here it's not like we see the flame directly, but like we see the light of the flickering lamp just above it, or reflected on, on a wall behind it, or something like that. Sometimes they say, like, imagine a butter lamp in a vessel, in a pot. So you can't see the actual lamp, but you see the light of it. So imagine this kind of flickering, orangish, yellowish light. Okay, so it's important to actually, we focus on the appearance, because that's what helps us as these things appear to the mind. It helps us to know, okay, so this is what's happening to me as I'm dying. I'm going through these stages of death. So now we'll go through these one by one and look at more characteristics that accompany each, and how the 25 constituents are ceasing to function at each of the stages of this first 4. Okay, so first, mirage-like appearance. So just to warn you also, this is a lot of detail, right? These 8 involved, there's a lot of detail here. So don't expect to be able to remember it and comprehend it and be able to, digest it all on this first go round. The main thing is to just be familiar with this whole list of 8 and what appears to the mind. But if you want to practice this kind of meditation, you go back and use this list of the 25 constituents and what happens at each of the stages, and yeah, just practice and learn more and more. Okay, so first, the mirage-like appearance. So this of the 4 elements, first the earth element dissolves, right? So of the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, air, earth is the most gross or coarse, air is the most subtle. So of course, the most coarse dissolves first, right? So first earth, and then the next one water, the next one fire, then last air will absorb last. So here at the first stage, earth element dissolves. So that means, so it dissolves, it doesn't mean like it, like you dissolve aspirin in water or something like that. It means it ceases to function. Its power to function becomes weaker and weaker. And so as that happens, then the water element becomes predominant, right? So, so as the earth element, it kind of absorbs or dissolves, or sort of synonyms here. It means it ceases to function, basically. And then, so we may have a sense of sinking into the ground because we don't have, the earth is like our sense of being supported, sturdy, as a solid object. So we lose that. So we might have a sense of sinking below the ground. Also, our ability to hold our body up. Also, the kind of the solidity of our body, like we, taking up space. It sort of said the body here in the next one. The inner form aggregate. So the form aggregate absorbs and the body becomes thin and weak, right? And then, so that's of the 5 aggregates. The first, the form aggregate absorbs. Of the 5 sense powers, the eye sense power is absorbed, which means our eye, we can't see anymore. Our eyesight weakens. We cannot see visible external forms. And then the inner subtle visible form. So this is we can't see external forms because the eye sense power weakens. And then there's the inner subtle visible form, right? So they're talking about the external form and the inner form absorbs, and the body loses its luster, right? So our body naturally has a kind of radiance and luster. So we lose that. And we can see this, when you're around very old people as they're dying, there is this kind of sense that their body doesn't have a certain glow anymore, right? Doesn't have any solidity anymore. It becomes kind of like mushy or soft, no resistance. So the body loses its luster. And then here, the inner appearance is like a shimmering mirage, right? So that's the name, that gives the name to this whole stage, is the inner appearance. It's like a shimmering mirage appearance to the person's mind. So this is an internal sign. So there's external signs. We can see that the person, that they can't hold up their body anymore. They can't see visible forms anymore. And then the body loses luster. Those are like external signs. People outside can see that. But then the person themselves, they experience these internal signs like sinking, a feeling of sinking under the ground, and a shimmering appearing to the mind. Those are internal signs. And then here the mirror-like wisdom absorbs. So the mirror-like wisdom, Rinpoche describes in his article as like the ability to be aware of many objects at once. Just like a mirror can reflect many objects at once, this mirror-like wisdom can like be aware of many different objects at once. So we lose that capacity here. Okay, so here let's pause for a moment and just try to meditate just for a minute or two on this. Imagine this happening, right? So we'll imagine that the earth. So okay. So again, put yourself in your kind of setting where you're dying. Remember, a nice, comfortable, slow death somewhere. So here we don't want to imagine we're like traumatized or in incredible pain or something. We want to be able to imagine the best possible conditions for being able to practice awareness of these stages. So first bring to mind, okay, so first just, think of the setting where you imagine dying. And then bring to mind the positive attitude you want to focus on as you're dying that we reflected on earlier. Okay, so now imagine this first stage of the 8 stages, the mirage-like appearance. So first imagine the earth element of your body, as I described it. It's declining. You can feel it's declining. The solidity, the ability to support is going away. I mean, instead of talking for again and again, I'll just run through them, remind you of all. So the earth element dissolves. At the same time, the form aggregate of the body. So the body becomes thin and weak. There might be a sense of sinking under the ground. At the same time, the eye sense power ceases to function. So we can't see clearly anymore. And then the inner subtle visible form dissolves, so the body loses its luster. And there's a shimmering appearance to the mind, like a mirage. So as you imagine experiencing those things happening, and then try to also imagine that you recognize clearly, oh, this is the first of the 8 stages of absorption as I'm dying, mirage-like appearance. And then you remind yourself, now's the time to meditate on whatever you've chosen you want to focus your mind on. Remember, so that as an example, I just say impermanence, recognizing the impermanence of myself, of all compounded phenomena, then generating love for all sentient beings, as an example, and then practice focusing your mind on that. Okay, we just have to spend a very short time on each one now, because we need to get through all 8, and be a lot of time. So here's the smoke-like appearance. I've made the letters in the color of smoke. And here, so the water element of the 4 elements, the water element dissolves, which again means it ceases to function, which means that there's a sense of the fluid in the body drying up. We can just feel it, especially in our mouth. The mouth dries out. But the other fluids in the body kind of dry up. There's no tears in the eyes. They dry up. And then the aggregate, so the eyes become dry. Then the aggregate of feeling dissolves. So there's no longer experience of feelings of pleasure or pain or even neutrality. So I have a hard time imagining what that is like, but there's no feelings of pleasure or pain. So we become, I want to say we become kind of neutral towards everything, but then it's instead, Rinpoche says also, there's no feeling of neutrality. I'm not sure what that is, but no pleasure and pain. You can kind of imagine, when you're really, we've been maybe really sick and high fever, and you become just kind of like, you're awake, but almost like comatose in a way, like unfeeling towards everything. I imagine something like that. Anyway, try to imagine what it's like. And then the ear sense power absorbs, so our hearing diminishes. We can no longer clearly hear the sounds around us. And then the inner subtle sounds absorb. So there's the usual hum in one's ears that ceases. And then there's an inner appearance, like smoke, appearing to the mind. And then the wisdom of equanimity absorbs. So I had to look this up. Rinpoche says the wisdom of equanimity is like having a sense of whether we have pleasant feelings or unpleasant feelings or neutral feelings. So they're all the same, ultimately. We have a sort of equanimous sort of attitude towards pleasure or pain. It's a kind of wisdom. So that also absorbs. Okay, so let's try to imagine here again. Just take a moment. Just do the same thing. Imagine the setting where you're dying. Remember the attitude you want to focus your mind on. And then just try to imagine these. So there's 5, right, of the 25 constituents. There's 5 of them absorbing here, right? The water element, aggregate of feeling, ear sense power, the object of sounds, and then the wisdom, equanimity. So as the best you can, imagine you experience these 5. Body drawing. You can no longer hear sounds clearly. Hum in the ears ceases. And there's a smoke-like appearance to the mind. Remember, I'm experiencing this smoke-like appearance, second of the 8 stages. Then focus your mind on, say, wisdom of impermanence and love for all sentient beings. And then, so also imagine, like at each stage, your mind becomes more subtle, and your so the positive attitude you want to generate or insight. So imagine impermanence and love for all sentient beings as our example, that becomes more powerful and more deep, more powerful at each stage. So you want to remember that too. Okay, there are a lot of things to remember here, you can see. That's why we have to go through it again and again and again, right? Become more and more familiar with it. This meditation on these 8 stages of absorption at the time of death, His Holiness frequently says in the teachings is something he does every day, multiple times. I think, like, I remember being surprised when I heard His Holiness say how many times he does it, like 8 or 10 or 16 or something, like many times every day in the context of different meditation practices he does. Any serious Buddhist practitioner, they go through these, not in all this detail, but at least just briefly, at least once a day, right? Okay, so the third here is fireflies or sparks appearing. So the fire element dissolves. So remember, that's the heat and the digestive power. So our digestion no longer functions, and the warmth of the body dissipates towards the heart. Right. So as the fire element ceases to function, the warmth of the body. So this is an external sign. So people, caring for the person can see their feet start to become cold. Their extremities, their fingers and hands clearly become colder. So the warmth of the body dissipates from the extremities towards the heart chakra. So here it said, if your karma to take rebirth is a virtuous karma, ripening, beginning to ripen, beginning to throw you already, the process of throwing you into a future rebirth, it's a virtuous karma, then the heat will dissipate from the lower part of the body up. If primarily a non-virtuous karma, to throw you into the lower realms as ripening, the heat will primarily dissipate from the top of your body down. The top of the body will become cold first. Virtuous karma, the lower part of the body will become cold first. Then the aggregate of discrimination. So remember, this is thinking, oh, this is that. I like this, I don't like that. That doesn't function anymore. That ceases to function. So we can no longer recognize even the names or details of people and objects around us. So even the people around us, we can't recognize that this is that person, this is that person, and their names. Can't remember. At this point, also the breathing becomes very labored. Then the nose sense power absorbs, so breathing again becomes difficult, and then the inner subtle sense absorbs, so we cannot detect sense, smells anymore. And then there's an inner mental appearance like fireflies or sparks, giving the name to the whole stage. And then the wisdom of discriminating awareness absorbs. So I think the elements are easiest to perceive happening, and the sense power ceasing to function. And each stage of these first four, those are the easiest. And then the appearance. Okay, so let's just contemplate, imagine this one happening. So just like before, imagine being in the setting, die a nice death. And the mirage-like appearance, the smoke-like appearance have already gone before. So within the smoke, now there's like fireflies or sparks kind of flying up, appearing in this, and we realize, okay, we're at the third stage. And we feel the warmth of our body dissipate, more pronounced dissipation of the warmth of the body from our extremities towards our heart center. We can no longer hear sounds clearly. And our ability to discriminate, this is that person, I did this before. I like this, I don't like that. That kind of mental ability diminishes. And then remember what you want to focus your mind on, and focus on that, and feel like you can generate a more powerful experience of that positive attitude than you had before. Okay. I think it's also important as we meditate on each of these to try to imagine generating a sense of just letting go, being like, this is okay, what's happening, it's natural, because resisting the whole process could be a big source of inner turmoil. No? So it's important also to generate a sense of just kind of letting go of this old life, this old body. Okay, then the fourth is called the flame of a lamp flickering, or a flickering lamp. Okay, so here, the coarse air or wind element. So it's qualified as coarse because there's a subtle wind that remains. Because remember, there's a subtle wind element that goes together with the subtle mind. So that remains, but the coarse air, like our breathing, right? And the kind of coarse movement of energy in the body, that diminishes. So the coarse air or wind element dissolves into consciousness. Here, breathing ceases, right? So just before, our breathing was belabored. Here, we give a long, take a short inhalation, then a long exhalation, raspy, and then we stop breathing. So breathing ceases. Then the aggregate of the 5 aggregates, the compositional factors absorb. We can no longer make physical movements. So we can no longer move the body. Body sense power absorbs. We no longer experience physical touch, like hot or cold or rough or smooth, or we no longer have the physical sensations anymore. And then the tongue sense power also absorbs at this stage. So the tongue contracts and the root of the tongue turns blue. Right, so this is really, but considered clinical death, right? Once you stop breathing after a few minutes. The root of the tongue turns blue and the tongue becomes short. And then the inner flavors absorb, so we can no longer experience any tastes. And then there's the inner mental appearance, like the light of a candle flickering in the wind about to go out, but then it becomes steady. I think His Holiness adds that detail. At first, it seems like, so it's not like you see the flame again. It's just like you see the light. Imagine that you can't see the flame, there's something blocking it, but the light of it is on a wall, like behind it. You see that kind of, or in the space above it. You see the kind of flickering light. His Holiness says at first it's kind of flickering and then it becomes steady. So that's the internal mental appearance. And then internal tactile objects. I don't have any detail for that. And then the all-accomplishing wisdom. So all-accomplishing wisdom, I don't know, Rinpoche describes it. I think it's, let me look. Open here. What does he say? This is the wisdom of attainment, remembering outer work and success and then necessity. So yeah, related to, I don't know, can you all see this? The PDF? No, okay. Great. Hang on, back to what you can see. All right. Anyway, it's the wisdom related to projects and work and the necessity of accomplishing different things. So that ceases. Okay, so let's just, imagine briefly, like before, setting of our death, then imagine these different things happening and focus one's mind, something positive, and imagine you're having a deeper experience of it than maybe ever before. Definitely this stage. So the wind element absorbs, we stop breathing, and so forth. Okay. Yeah. So that's the first 4 of the 8 stages. Here are we. There we go. First 4: mirage-like appearance, smoke-like appearance, and the fireflies or sparks in the smoke, and then the flame of the lamp flickering. So that's the first 4. And then the next 4, remember, are vivid white mind sky. Actually, I'll go down here. Oh, sorry. All right. Anyway, the next 4 are vivid white appearance, or mind sky, vivid reddish orange appearance, vivid black appearance of near attainment, it's called, and then the clear light of death is the last one. So just before that, after the 4 elements, there's earth, water, fire, air. In the 4th stage, the air element absorbs into consciousness. And then what's called the 80 gross conceptions cease to function. So these are gross kind of conceptual consciousness, different conceptual consciousness. They all cease to function. They're gross conceptual consciousness. We don't have time to go through the whole list of 80 now. Yeah, you can find it. I'm not even sure which book. Maybe His Holiness goes through. I don't remember. Anyway, you can ask me later figure out where that's listed. I'm not sure in English. I know where to find it in Tibetan, but in English, I'm not sure. Okay, anyway. So imagine just all your gross concepts cease, right? That's the thing. And then there's these 4 stages. And we don't have much time left now because I want to leave some time for question and answer and then some time for discussion. So, but these are quite simple. I haven't typed out the descriptions for each one of these because they're very brief. I'll just describe, but they're in both His Holiness book and Lama Zopar's book, his article. So, okay, so the last 4 stages are, so this is all from the 5 aggregates. This is the mental, there's only 3 left now. The mental sense power, the consciousness of the 5 aggregates, sorry, of the 25 constituents, there are only 3 left, right? The aggregate of consciousness, of the 6 sense powers, mental sense power, and of the 5 wisdoms, the nature of phenomena wisdom. So those are kind of gradually absorbing in stages through these 4. Main thing is consciousness. The consciousness, the grosser levels of consciousness are ceasing to function. More subtle levels of consciousness are becoming manifest. That's if we just know that, and then the appearance, that's fine. His Holiness in his book, he also describes kind of what's happening in the body as far as, just drops, subtle drops in the body moving through the channels, but I won't go through that now. If you want to know, you can look at His Holiness or go look at the texts. But so let's just briefly imagine each. First, vivid white appearance. So there's an appearance to the mind as if, so an autumn sky, right? So why do we say autumn sky always? Because for all 4 of these, it always says autumn sky. Because here in India, during the summer, the hot season, which is from like March to June, it's really hot, there's no rain, it's very dry, and there's a lot of dust, right? So the whole atmosphere is full of dust and it's kind of hazy. Whereas then monsoon comes and it rains for 3 months straight. And so all that dust in the sky, it all settles out. It all gets, cleaned out of the sky by the rains. And then after monsoon, the sky is incredibly clear, right? It's very clear. So there's a very clear space of the sky. So that's why it says autumn sky, because the autumn sky is very clear. And then it's described, so this first one, it's like an autumn sky pervaded by white light. Right? So imagine at night, not that you can see the moon, but like this, on a full moon, how that white light, soft white light pervades the space, the sky. So it's that kind of inner appearance. Yeah. So that's the main thing. We just imagine that. So previously was what is flickering, light like a flickering lamp. The air element absorbed, we stopped breathing. The tongue contracted, right? We're unable to taste or even feel anything with the body anymore. So now the body is kind of, it's not really playing any part. So here's just the mind. And we imagine to our mind this appearance like, very spacious, clear, kind of autumn sky, like that, like a vast, clear space, pervaded by a very soft white light. So imagine we have that kind of appearance. We recognize this is the 5th of the 8 absorptions. And I have to use this opportunity now to meditate and focus your mind on what you've chosen to focus on. And imagine here, especially, so your mind is totally free from all those distracting thoughts, right? It's very subtle. So whatever you focus on becomes very powerful. Try to imagine that. Okay, so for the last three, I think we can kind of keep meditating and I just describe what appears. So next, this vast space, clear space, pervaded by white light, that appearance starts to fade and is replaced by same vast clear space pervaded by orangish, reddish orange light. You know, like in a beautiful sunset in autumn, the sky pervaded by this brilliant, beautiful orangish light. So imagine that. Imagine the mind becomes more subtle than before. And you recognize this is the 6th of the 8 stages. So the vivid white appearance just went before. Now this is the vivid red-orange appearance. In the stages of dying, I have to use this opportunity to meditate. And then imagine you generate an experience of, say my example is wisdom of impermanence and universal love, loving kindness. So imagine whatever you focused, whatever you've chosen to focus your mind on, to generate a more powerful, deep experience of it than you've ever had before. Okay, and then the next, vivid black appearance of near attainment. So it's called near attainment because it's just the stage just before we attain the clear light of death. So here, imagine same black, same very clear space, but now this orange light fades and it's pervaded by just thick blackness, thick darkness. So imagine an autumn sky with no stars, no moon, no sunlight, just dense, thick darkness. So in the first part of the stage, you're aware, you're conscious. And the last half of the stage, you swoon into unconsciousness. So during the first part, we can try to meditate. So the first part, imagine the mind pervaded by darkness. We recognize this is the 7th, the 8 stages. We need to meditate and focus on a positive attitude. So at this point, the mind's extremely subtle, and so that experience of that attitude is extremely profound, deep, and powerful. And then we swoon into unconsciousness. So it's said that the longer we remain in that unconscious state, then the longer we can remain in the clear light of death. So it's not a bad thing. It's just a natural kind of thing. That's Chöden Rinpoche apparently taught that. I haven't heard it from other sources. And then so now the clear light of death, the grand finale, and the most subtle level of the mind becomes manifest. So now imagine this same So we imagine we swoon into unconsciousness, then we awake from that. And then we experience internally this mental space. It's vast, like a mind sky, this vast, clear space, pervaded by very radiant light. And it said, like, imagine you're like sitting on a mountaintop in the autumn, on top of a mountain, looking up at the sky, a totally clear sky, no dust, no clouds, no moon, no sun, but it's pervaded like by the light of dawn, just before sunrise. It's pervaded by very luminous light, a clear, luminous light pervading the sky, pervading the space of your mind. So this is the kind of appearance you have. And this is the most, so imagine the most subtle level of your mind becoming manifest. And you recognize this and focus on whatever positive attitude you've been focusing on. And imagine you have a deeper, more powerful, more profound experience of that than you've ever had before. Okay, so stop there. Oh, there's questions for discussion. We'll come back to that. Okay, so if there are any questions about any of that I just presented, I can try to answer, and then we'll have a little discussion, breakout rooms. So what do you all think of that? The 8 stages of death. Kind of nice, no?
I was wondering if I have a question.
Go ahead, Jorge.
Oh, sorry. So you were talking about when we get old, we suffer because our body just becomes old. And I know that you're not supposed to kill humans or yourself, but can we choose to die better than suffer? Because isn't suffering an option? There's a difference between pain is what happens to us and suffering is what we do with the pain.
You mean, is euthanasia okay?
Yes, basically.
No,
Yeah.
it's still killing.
It's okay.
Yeah, so whenever we're killing, even someone suffering, we're suffering, or another person we care about, an animal or another human being is suffering a lot. Then if we end their life, we're still like destroying their life, kind of the point. In a way, you might think, well, they're suffering so much, isn't that destroying their life? Yes, they are, but to end the person's life is kind of like artificially, in a way, instead of just letting the natural process play out. It's okay to take someone off life support, right? Like, because that's not, I mean, this gets to a very tricky gray area, right? Because there's a difference between like doing something to cause someone's death, like injecting them with poison. Clearly that's killing, right? But then just letting nature take its course, unaffected by artificial kind of means of support, isn't, I mean, it depends how you think about it, but it's not necessarily like inflicting some kind of harm that causes death. It's just letting nature take its course, right? Whatever might happen. So I know there's a lot of very tricky questions about euthanasia. We don't have time to go into those now. We can come back. But it's okay to let let something, an animal or a person die if that seems like that's what is kind of naturally going to happen, then without trying to do everything. We don't have to do everything we can in our power to make them live a little longer, if it seems like a very unnatural and something is something that's going to just entail more suffering for the person, right? But we shouldn't intentionally think, oh yeah, it'd be better if they die now, I'm going to, because we do create the karma of killing. So one is that if they have the karma to experience a certain amount of suffering at the time of death, that karma will still ripen in the future later, right? Even if you artificially cut off their life. Now that karma to suffer in that way will eventually ripen. So you're not eliminating the karma. And you're creating the karma to have someone kill you also. And we can't tell internally in the person's mind, even though it might look like they're suffering a lot, we can't really tell what's happening, right? So, because there are many cases of people dying that, like, people who've been in a coma or they've had a severe illness and their body is kind of ravaged by illness and they're incoherent and maybe even delusional for years, even like with Alzheimer's, like for years. But then in the moment just before death, they suddenly become lucid and say something very clear and meaningful. So if we, artificially kill them before that, we destroy the opportunity for them to have that aspect of natural death. So yeah, it's a difficult question. A lot of things to think about. And I know, the intention to eliminate suffering, yeah, of course, is a good intention. But yeah, it's a difficult one now.
Okay, thank you.
What about the 8 stages? Does it make
Eve
sense,
has
you
her hand
guys?
raised. Eve has her hand raised.
Okay. Oh, great. Yeah, Eve.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not exactly sure if I have the vocabulary to ask this question, but so what I'm asking about is consciousness. So the consciousness is separating from the body is our basic definition. And when you were explaining maybe in the last 4 stages, the at that point, the eyes aren't working, the sense of smell isn't working. And you were talking then about being unconscious. So what's experiencing? Is it, I know that the eyes and ears aren't experiencing these stages. Is it just the consciousness that's experiencing it? And when you use the word at the black stage or something, you become unconscious. Did you mean that in some way that I don't understand? Or was that just the general word unconscious? Do you see where I'm asking? It's not well asked. Okay,
Yeah, no, it's well asked. Very, very clear. Yeah, good question. So, yeah, this just points out to a lot of details I didn't really mention that need to be filled in. So, mainly it's the mental consciousness experiencing. So like now, just close your eyes and try to remember something happened in the past. Like that's your mental consciousness functioning, right? Our eye consciousness, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, sense consciousness, they can't remember, they can't think about the future. It's only our mental consciousness. So it's that mental consciousness, which is having all of those internal appearances, the mirage-like appearance, then the smoke-like appearance, and then the fireflies, Then the one you're referring to, then was the vivid white appearance, then the vivid orange appearance, then the vivid black appearance. That's all mental consciousness, something appearing to our mind. Just like now, we can visualize something. Like I can visualize, walking in a beautiful meadow in, alpine meadow in the mountains of Alaska or something, right? That appears to the mind. So it's that kind of appearance. It's not appearing from external, it's appearing to our own mind. So when we have that, but okay, so now we come to the black, the black near attainment, like the vivid black appearance of near attainment, right? There are different terms used for the same thing, but so what I said, the first half we're conscious, then the second half we swoon into unconsciousness. What does that mean? So yeah, you can imagine that So imagine again, imagine some appearance. Like I was just saying, alpine meadow in the mountains of Alaska. So even if I don't, like my eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body are not functioning, imagine I can still have this mental appearance. But then I swoon into unconsciousness means I don't even have that. There's nothing appearing to the mind anymore. And I'm not even conscious of that. Like, it's kind of like going to sleep. It's like, now we're awake. When we lay in bed, we gradually, our sense consciousness gradually cease. We might be thinking something, but then eventually we even stop and we go into deep sleep, and we're not aware of anything external. We're not even aware of anything internal, and we're not even aware of that, nothing going on internal. We're just total blank. And then from that deep sleep, we rise into a dream, right? So then what's the difference between deep sleep and a dream? A dream, where there's some mental experience. Even our sense consciousness are not functioning, but there's a mental experience. So the difference in deep sleep is like we're totally unconscious. So this, in that it's the seventh stage, right, of vivid black appearance. The first part is almost like a dream, like there's some mental experience. The second part is like deep sleep. There's nothing going on. Does that make sense, Eve? Where'd you go?
Yes, thank you. That clarified it exactly. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. And then I think Christine and James.
Yeah. So I was curious, how do they know these? Like, and so two parts, like how has this been documented? And then have Buddhists also correlated this with other documented like near-death experiences? And is that white light the same that people claim to see when they've almost died?
Yeah, excellent question. First, how is it known? So that's not a question asked in the text or answered, but I think it's usually described as like, this is the experience of meditators. So people, we don't have to wait until we die to experience these 8 levels of absorption through different practices. So as His Holiness says, this teaching belongs to like the tantric aspect of Buddhism. So through different practices of like manipulating the winds in the channels in the body, the energies in the body, we can cause like all of our winds to absorb at the heart chakra, as it naturally does at death, but through mental focus, through concentration, we can cause that to happen, and then cause all these stages of dissolution to happen even before we die. But then how do we know that this actually happens at death? I think it's assumed if a person achieves very high level of concentration, meditative concentrations, they can remember going through this as they died, in the past life, or they can go through it and then come back. So like that. Yeah, so an ordinary person, yeah, for the most part, we do go through these levels, but most people, they're not aware of that, what's going on. They're thinking about other things. They're distracted by other things, maybe very afraid or whatever. And so they don't recognize. But then that comes to your second question. Well, have they correlated it with the accounts of people who've had near-death experiences? Or as Sam Parnia says, actual death, I forget, he uses a different term, because it's like you actually do die and come back. So two big researchers in this area are Pim Ben Lomel and Sam Parnia. Pim Ben Lomel passed away. Sam Parnia is currently one of the biggest names of research into people who have near-death experiences. So yeah, it's very interesting to look at their accounts, because there are a lot of, I think another one is maybe someone Moody, forget some of his name, but there are many experiences that people have as they're dying. So near-death experience, people who've died usually from cardiac arrest, drowning, asphyxiation, that then they are rushed to an emergency room and resuscitated, and then they can have memories of things that happened during the time. So there's a lot of, I really like this topic. There's a lot of things to discuss here, but we don't have so much time left. So, but one of the primary thing people experience is going through a tunnel of light, and then feeling like they're in a presence of a being, an all-pervasive kind of love, all-pervasive being of love and total acceptance. And that does sound, yeah, kind of similar to clear light of death. But no, there's been no effort by, Buddhists to correlate the two. So that's I mean, that's a rich field for us, us modern Western Buddhists to look at. And there are a lot of interesting questions that arise, from that. But there hasn't been any correlation so far. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Was there another question? I thought maybe not, but we should do breakout rooms now, actually. Oh, Jorge has another question. Okay, if it's a short one. Jorge.
Yeah, just a short question. What exactly defines as near death? Because if you're near death, doesn't that mean there's no point of turning back, or there's a point of turning back? Because the closest thing I can remember to near death is like almost dying from COVID, but like coming back. But the only thing I felt was just regret, not for myself, but like the thing that I failed to do.
And so now you're here discovering Buddhism, of course. No, no, near death. No, it's a misnomer, that term. That's why I said this. Actually, because near death experience is actually talking about people who have actually died. Clinical as it's defined in modern medical terminology, which is totally different than the Buddhist understanding of what death is, right? But modern Western medical kind of view is once you stop breathing, then quickly your heart stops beating, then there's no blood circulation to your brain, then there's no that reflex in the eyes anymore. At that point, you're dead, right? In the Buddhist terms, at that point, your subtle consciousness can still be in your heart chakra and your body for 3 days, actually. So you're not dead at all that time. But when we talk about near-death experience, they're not talking about people who just got close to death and then came back, like people who got very sick, like from COVID or something, and then recovered. No, it's talking about people who they're clinically dead, but then they're resuscitated or they come back to life for whatever reason after. Could be 10 minutes, could be, and Samparnia points out, because he's a anesthesiologist, I think. But he points out these days it can be, because if the body's cold, they can cool the body quickly. It can be an hour or 2 after you're clinically dead. You can still be resuscitated now, as opposed to 50 years ago. But it's talking about people who are dead and then come back. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so now let me share my screen again. Otherwise, so the questions for you to discuss in the breakout rooms are, what do you think you would like to focus on as you're dying? I know it can be very personal, but if you like to discuss, you can discuss. These are just suggestions. Or talk about any questions you have surrounding that. Then what would be your ideal process of dying? I don't know, might be nice to kind of think how to do that. Does this process described in the 8 stages of absorption at the time of death make sense or not? What are some questions you have around that whole process? And then do you think this description might be useful to you personally or not? Anyway, those are suggestions to talk about. So now I think we have 20 minutes. No, we only have 15 minutes left, isn't it? Okay, so let's make a 12-minute breakout room. Oh, sorry, I meant to make it longer than last time, but it's become shorter. Were there any questions arising from in your discussion group that I should address? Yeah, Mary?
So after the final stage of death, in the 8 stage is completed, then you're reborn in the bardo?
Yes, generally, yes. Yeah, so what?
Because from what I understand, it can be very frightening, and there's different like flashing lights, and it's disorienting, and
yeah. So so then you go from the clear light of death as the 8th, And then you go in reverse order. So then your mind actually, at the end of the clear light of death, your consciousness leaves from your body, actually. And you begin reverse order. So you go back to the vivid black appearance, then the orange appearance, then the white appearance, all the way back. And then you become conscious as a bardo being, right? And then you abide in the bardo for however long. And then when you die from the bardo, you go again through those 8 stages of dissolution. And then you take rebirth as a human, then you again go in reverse order from the moment of conception. So it's like that. That's described a little bit in Holmes' book. But yeah, that's a good question. When do all those terrifying experiences described in like the Bardo books, at what point do those occur? I think they can already be occurring during the 8 stages of dissolution, or before or during. So these 8 stages of dissolution, they can happen very quickly, like in a second, in a case someone dies suddenly, or they can happen very slowly over days when a person dies very slowly. So, but those terrifying experiences, I think they can happen during the stages of dissolution. They can also happen like during the bardo, but I'm not sure. They definitely wouldn't be happening during the clear light of death. I think those last 4, the vivid white appearance, orange, the black, and then the clear light of death, I don't think they'd be happening during that time, right? Because those are very subtle levels of mind, and the 80 gross conceptions, which, okay, so Mary Ellen kindly looked up where you can find those in English, and they're in this book. It's in the chat. It's a very good book called Death, Intermediate State, and Rebirth in Tibetan Buddhism by Ledi Rinpoche, and I think, yeah. Anyway, I had translated by Jeffrey Hopkins. So they're all listed in there. And actually, this whole 8 stages is described in detail in that book. It's another good resource. So it's in the chat. But remember, the 80 gross conceptions have absorbed right after the air element absorbs in the 4th stage. So you wouldn't have gross like fear and the kind of gross conception after that. So during the last 4 stages, I don't think those, although I haven't seen a clear, description of this, but I don't think those sort of visions at the Bardo would be happening during that, but they could happen definitely during the first 4 levels. And also during the Bardo, as a Bardo being, you could have those, I think. Yeah, okay, our time is up. We should dedicate now. So yeah, let's just, if you have more questions, you can write down, ask next time. Or I think the next 2 sessions will have, I don't have so much to present in those 2 sessions. That's more, so we'll have more time, I think, for questions and discussing everything we've gone through so far. Anyway, let's dedicate by first rejoicing in all the merit we've created and the merit created by other ordinary and enlightened beings. And rejoice for a moment and increase all the merits. And then also just briefly reflect what we've gone through in this session, mainly the 8 absorptions at the time of death, but we've begun by thinking generally how to prepare for death, some general advice to prepare for death. Within that, the most important being to clearly recognize what it is we want to focus on as we're dying. And then becoming familiar with the whole process of how we die in terms of the 8 stages and that happening in terms of the dissolution of the 25 constituents. So our aggregates, the elements, sense powers, the objects we experience, and so forth. And then especially the internal visions that appear. And then, so understanding what happens at each of the 8 stages, and then practicing using those, imagining those occurring, and using those each to meditate more and more deeply on whatever virtuous attitude we want to try to, in a way, be our refuge at the time of death that we want to rely upon and cultivate as we die. so we can rejoice in all that. And then whatever merit we dedicate, we've generated. Imagine this all gathered together, motion of positive energy. We dedicate that all beings especially may have a very peaceful death. And when the time comes to die, they accept that and put it to the best possible use and die in a very peaceful, painless way. All those who've died recently, may they take a precious human rebirth, a rebirth in a pure land with the best possible conditions to continue on their spiritual path. In short, may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering, especially hunger, thirst, loneliness, abuse. May the world at large be free from suffering, especially climate destruction, global warming, climate destruction may be reversed, and pollution of the natural environment. And then may all of our spiritual teachers have long and stable lives in the Buddha Dharma and other spiritual traditions which authentically benefit sentient beings when they flourish. Then bring to mind any other prayers you'd like to make. So may all of those, your virtuous prayers also be accomplished in accordance with your wishes. Okay, thank you all. Have a good week. See you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venerable Legstock and Mary Ellen and Urs.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Venerable, so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.